The divorce papers were already signed. The moving truck was waiting outside. Every neighbor believed the quiet wife had finally lost everything. Then, just as her husband carried the last box toward the front porch, an elderly woman stepped out of a silver sedan, held up a weathered envelope with trembling hands, and revealed a truth that shattered decades of lies. In a single unforgettable moment, the woman everyone had ignored became the only person who had been protecting an entire family from falling apart. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel. Every act of support helps our community continue sharing stories that remind us how compassion can change lives. Most people who knew Rebekah Ellison described her with only one word: quiet. They assumed silence meant weakness. They mistook patience for surrender. They believed that because she rarely defended herself, she had nothing worth saying. For nearly 20 years she lived in the same peaceful neighborhood, smiled at everyone she met, remembered birthdays, brought homemade bread to sick neighbors, volunteered at the local library every Saturday morning, and quietly repaired every broken corner of her family without asking for recognition. Yet the people closest to her somehow saw the least. Her husband, Graham, had once admired her gentle spirit. During the early years of their marriage, he often said her calmness made the world feel less frightening. They had built a modest home together, welcomed 2 children, and dreamed about growing old side by side. But years of financial pressure, endless work deadlines, and disappointment slowly hardened him. He began believing confidence sounded louder than kindness. He admired outspoken people at work and started viewing Rebekah's quiet nature as a burden instead of a gift. Little by little, he stopped asking her opinion. Family decisions became his alone. He interrupted her before she finished sentences. Friends noticed but assumed the marriage was simply going through ordinary struggles. Their children, Nolan and Ivy, loved both parents deeply, but they gradually followed their father's example, believing their mother simply preferred staying in the background. Rebekah never argued. She continued preparing breakfast every morning, remembering everyone's schedules, leaving encouraging notes inside lunch bags, keeping track of doctor appointments, balancing household expenses, and secretly selling her handmade quilts at local craft fairs whenever money became tight. Graham believed his overtime shifts had saved the family from financial ruin. He never realized the mortgage had been paid several times because Rebekah quietly contributed thousands of dollars she had earned without telling anyone. She wanted him to feel proud rather than ashamed. As the years passed, Graham accepted a management position that demanded even longer hours. Success brought recognition but also pride. He began comparing his marriage to those of wealthy colleagues whose spouses dressed differently, traveled constantly, and entertained large social circles. Rebekah remained content with simple joys, tending flowers, reading novels beneath the maple tree in the backyard, and helping elderly neighbors carry groceries. Graham mistook contentment for lack of ambition. Eventually, the emotional distance became impossible to ignore. He convinced himself that the marriage had become empty because Rebekah never fought for it. He never considered that perhaps she was fighting every single day in ways he simply refused to notice. One bright spring morning, after months of quiet tension, Graham placed divorce papers on the kitchen table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating every signature line with painful clarity. Rebekah looked at the documents for a long time before gently folding them closed. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she refused to let bitterness replace dignity. She signed without creating a scene because she believed love could never be forced. The news spread through the neighborhood faster than anyone expected. Some whispered that Graham deserved someone more exciting. Others pitied Rebekah, assuming she had wasted her life serving people who never appreciated her. Few knew how many invisible sacrifices had built that very family. As arrangements for separating their lives moved forward, Rebekah packed her belongings carefully. Every photograph she wrapped reminded her of birthdays, graduations, family picnics, and ordinary afternoons that had once seemed too precious to end. She blamed no one aloud. Even while her own heart fractured, she worried about how the divorce would affect Nolan and Ivy. The children, now adults beginning careers of their own, struggled with divided loyalties. Nolan believed his father had simply fallen out of love. Ivy felt confused because she had never witnessed dramatic arguments. She could not understand how such a quiet marriage had reached such a painful ending. The final day arrived beneath a clear blue sky. A moving truck stood outside the house while neighbors watched discreetly from gardens and sidewalks. Graham carried boxes with determined efficiency, convincing himself difficult choices required emotional distance. Rebekah loaded only a few treasured possessions into her modest car. She paused briefly beside the flowering roses she had planted years earlier. Their blossoms filled the air with fragrance, reminding her that beauty often survived painful seasons. Then everything changed. An elderly woman named Margaret Hale stepped out of a silver sedan holding an old envelope protected inside a transparent folder. Margaret had been Graham's late mother's closest friend for over 40 years. Age had slowed her steps but not her determination. She asked everyone to stop before another box left the house. Confused faces turned toward her as she unfolded several handwritten letters. Margaret explained that Graham's mother had written them shortly before passing away but asked that they remain sealed until she believed her son had forgotten the true meaning of family. She admitted she had struggled with whether to honor that request but could no longer remain silent after hearing about the divorce. The first letter described countless moments Graham had never witnessed. His mother wrote about watching Rebekah skip buying herself winter coats so the children could attend music lessons. She wrote about Rebekah paying overdue bills without complaint after selling treasured heirlooms. She described afternoons when Rebekah spent hours comforting Graham's father through illness while Graham believed she was simply visiting neighbors. The second letter contained copies of financial records Graham had never seen. They revealed that during several difficult years, Rebekah's quilting business had quietly contributed enough money to prevent foreclosure. Every payment had been deposited anonymously into their mortgage account after she convinced the bank to keep her involvement confidential. The third letter broke Graham completely. His mother confessed that shortly before her death, she had asked Rebekah to make one impossible promise: never allow Graham to carry the burden of believing he had failed his family financially. She knew his pride would crush him. Rebekah had honored that promise for nearly 2 decades, accepting misunderstanding rather than exposing his weaknesses. Margaret then handed Graham one final page stained by faded tears. His mother's final words thanked Rebekah for loving her son even during the seasons when he struggled to love himself. She called Rebekah the strongest woman she had ever known because true strength rarely announced itself. Silence settled across the front yard. Neighbors who had quietly judged Rebekah lowered their eyes. Nolan stared at financial documents showing years of sacrifices he never imagined. Ivy covered her face as memories suddenly appeared differently. Every birthday gift, every family vacation, every reassuring smile during difficult times now carried hidden meaning. Graham felt something inside him collapse. For the first time in years, he looked directly at his wife instead of past her. He noticed the tiredness beneath her gentle smile. He noticed the worn sleeves on her cardigan because she always replaced everyone else's clothing first. He noticed hands roughened from countless hours of sewing quilts that had silently preserved their home. He realized the quiet woman standing before him had spent half her life protecting his dignity. Not because he deserved it every day, but because she loved him every day. Overwhelmed by regret, Graham stepped forward. His pride, carefully built over years, disappeared beneath unbearable truth. Tears streamed freely as he admitted that he had measured love by volume instead of sacrifice. He had mistaken silence for emptiness when it had actually been overflowing with devotion. Rebekah listened without anger. Pain remained visible across her face because forgiveness never erased wounds. Yet neither bitterness nor revenge occupied her heart. She simply stood there with the same grace that had carried her through years of unseen struggles. The following weeks became a journey unlike anyone expected. The divorce proceedings were paused, not because everything had magically healed, but because honest conversations finally began. Graham attended counseling to confront the pride and insecurity that had blinded him. Nolan and Ivy apologized for overlooking the countless quiet ways their mother had loved them. They began spending afternoons helping her at local craft fairs, discovering stories behind every quilt she had sewn. Neighbors who once assumed they understood everything started treating one another differently. They realized how often appearances concealed remarkable acts of kindness. Rebekah continued volunteering at the library. She still smiled gently. She still preferred listening before speaking. But something had changed. This time, people leaned closer whenever she shared even a few words because they had learned wisdom did not always arrive with a loud voice. Months later, during a bright autumn afternoon community gathering, Graham stood before friends and neighbors to publicly acknowledge the woman he had nearly lost forever. He thanked Rebekah for demonstrating that the strongest hearts often speak the softest. He admitted that success without gratitude had nearly destroyed the greatest blessing of his life. The applause that followed was not for dramatic speeches or grand gestures. It was for years of invisible faithfulness finally receiving the honor it deserved. Rebekah accepted the moment with humble tears. She understood that recognition mattered far less than transformed hearts. Watching her family rediscover compassion became the greatest reward she could have imagined. Life never became perfect afterward. There were still disagreements, difficult days, and moments requiring patience. But every challenge was now faced together instead of separately. Graham learned to ask for advice before making important decisions. Nolan and Ivy called their mother simply to hear her thoughts. The home once filled with quiet loneliness gradually became filled with quiet peace. People often remembered the dramatic afternoon when an old envelope stopped a divorce. Yet the true miracle had begun years earlier through thousands of unnoticed acts of love performed by a woman who never demanded applause. Her greatest strength had never been silence itself. It had been choosing compassion when resentment seemed easier. It had been believing forgiveness could rebuild what pride had broken. It had been proving that gentle hearts often carry the heaviest burdens with extraordinary courage. Before this story ends, we'd love to hear from you. What do you think was the greatest lesson Rebekah taught her family? Please leave a meaningful comment and share your thoughts about the power of quiet kindness, forgiveness, or unseen sacrifice. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. As the afternoon sun bathed the little neighborhood in warm golden light, Rebekah stood beside the garden she had planted years before. The roses bloomed brighter than ever, not because they had been spared storms, but because they had survived them. Her family gathered around her with grateful hearts, finally understanding that the strongest foundations are often built by the quietest hands. And in that peaceful daylight, surrounded by forgiveness instead of regret, they discovered that love does not always announce itself with loud words. Sometimes it lives through gentle faithfulness, patient sacrifice, and a heart that never stops believing another beginning is possible.